Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'll be your host tonight. I am the Assistant Director of NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, North Carolina. I'm glad y'all are here. I'm here at the front desk of NAMI North Carolina. I've got a Van Gogh type picture behind me and our logo in an abstract art format behind me as well. I'm a mid-sized blonde with glasses, kind of nondescript, basically looking person. And tonight's show is about two men whose lives were shaped by the justice system. One overcame long odds to build success after years of incarceration. The other helped him and has a personal connection to justice. We'll be getting the full story from Adrian Boone and Sharif Brown in just a moment. First, I want to look at some of that context behind their story. Sometimes that framework, the background makes such a big difference. There's a story about a dog who bites a boy and pulls him to the ground. The dog looks like the bad guy until you learn he was saving the boy from a snake. Let's look at the historical context of this story, mass incarceration. Once in a while, I get inspired to do a PowerPoint, and this is one of those occasions. So I'm very excited about showing you this PowerPoint. Mass incarceration, it's a fact, I think, that many acknowledge in the United States, that our justice system is broken. On the left side and on the right side, you've got people speaking out. None other than Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist acknowledge sometimes prisons have the consequence of hardening a nonviolent, low-risk offender and making their future much worse. Author of Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, points out that it's illegal to discriminate against African Americans unless that discrimination is shrouded with the label of felon. So let's look at mass incarceration by the numbers. This is a video narrated by Bruce Western. He's a professor of sociology with ties to Columbia and Harvard University, leading academic expert on American incarceration. Let's check this out.
Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups. The rate of incarceration now is about 5 times higher than it was historically. Historically, it was 100 per 100,000. Now it's about 500 per 100,000. If we look at prison, if we add jail to that, it's about 700 per 100,000. Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9. The research shows the kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out. And there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls. And there's a very real risk here that incarceration becomes an inherited trait. The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty. And we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.
Okay. So I had a bunch of slides lined up and then I caught that video which captured every point on every slide. So I decided to go with that. Really good stuff there. Now I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. We are very grateful for their guidance and support. And now I'm so happy to have tonight with us these two gentlemen who are going to share a wonderful story. Adrian Boone, he is the Director of Operations for Solutions for Independence in Winston-Salem, and Sharif Brown, Program Manager for State Reentry with the Alliance of Disability Advocates in Raleigh. And I think you have a presence in other parts of the state as well. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask this question to both of you and you can decide who goes first. We'd like to know the background of our guests. Give us your story in a nutshell.
Adrian, by all means.
Okay, well, my name is Adrian Boone. I am an African-American Black male. I am bald-headed. I wear glasses. I have a full beard. I'm about 5'11" and maybe 190 pounds. My background is just my apartment. You maybe see a few lights in the background, but that's it.
She wants your whole background.
Oh, you mean like the entire story? I thought we were doing introductions. Okay. So my background in a nutshell is I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I serve an extensive incarceration. While doing that incarceration, I did multiple programs and schooling, whatever the institution where I was had to offer, which ushered me into a reentry program where I met Mr. Brown, who became my reentry mentor / community inclusion specialist.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sharif.
And my name is Sharif Brown. I'm also an African-American male, bald head, glasses with a beard. My background is going to be a faded yellow. And essentially my story in a nutshell, born and raised in Flushing, Queens in New York, born and raised in the urbanized area or what most people deem as the projects, relocated to North Carolina, had a brother that had numerous stints of incarceration, came to North Carolina, linked up with ADA, was able to spearhead this reentry program that we have right now, which led me to cross paths with Mr. Adrian Boone.
All right. We'll start with Adrian then. You were raised in urban Baltimore and some of your friends were victim of gun violence at a young age, 11, 12. How did that environment impact you?
Yes, that's very true. So I grew up in Baltimore, East Baltimore. If you're familiar with The Wire, a lot of the series from HBO, The Wire, was actually filmed in the neighborhood where I grew up at. So that environment and the things that go on in everyday life in that environment, unfortunately, it was like my norm. It's what I kind of expected out of life. It's what I saw every day. Yes, around the age of maybe 11 and 12, one of my first friends was shot and killed, actually, a mistaken identity. He was standing on the block with some friends. Someone drove through, did a drive-by looking for someone else. He was out there and he was struck once and killed. And what it did to me overall, it honestly made life a bit bleak for me because I thought that was a normalized death at a very young age and violent death at a very young age. So the stigma in my neighborhood was that if you lived to be 16, it was really a big celebratory event. 18 was another celebratory event because you were not expected to live to see 21.
That is, those are grim numbers, and
yes.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yes, thank you.
And Sharif.
Pretty much to piggyback off what Adrian said, growing up in an urbanized environment or the projects as what is deemed no social resources available, no financial resources available, and sometimes or the majority of the time you'll witness death at an early age, whether it's your family or your friends or just seeing someone being murdered in the street of your projects. So just like Adrian, I've experienced a multitude of funerals, more than I tend to count, for individuals at a very, very young age. Like Adrian said, if you make it to 16, essentially some individuals feel like they lived their entire life because they weren't meant to make it past 16. Making it to 18, like Adrian said, is a very big accomplishment. Making it to 21 or even 30 is not even considered the norm.
Unheard
If you
of.
make it to 30 in the projects, you are considered an anomaly because most individuals don't make it past the age of 30 for whatever reason. So Adrian and I have similar experiences. His more hands-on, me more third party, but we've both witnessed the same detriment environment that unfortunately probably damaged the both of us beyond our scope of recognition, but perseverance and patience, and we're still here.
And you told me this yesterday as we were getting to know each other, and the word that came to my mind was gaslighting. That to go through that and have those health outcomes and have that traumatic life experience and never have it acknowledged, I just can't imagine. Yeah, that's very intense stuff. And I congratulate you both. You've just done so much and come such a long way with that difficult start.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so you alluded to this, Sharif. You mentioned growing up in New York City. That you had said you had attended an interesting number of funerals versus weddings. Can you share that story with us now?
Sure, no problem. Obviously, due to my age, growing up in the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s, which was considered the crack epidemic, a lot of families were destroyed because of this narcotic. A lot of families were separated because individuals were serving long stretches of incarceration with the Rockefeller laws that were put into place to try to stop individuals from selling crack cocaine. But unfortunately, when there are no other resources in your environment, you're going to essentially reverberate to what the only thing that's available. And a lot of times that's drug dealing. So I've seen, unfortunately, a number of my friends either get shot or killed because of drug dealing, or suffering life sentences, and they're receiving these sentences at the age of about 19 and getting life, or 50, 60, 70 years. And essentially that's your whole life going right there. So, but yeah, I've experienced a multitude of funerals and only one wedding. And it's sad when you can count the number of weddings on one hand that you've been to, but you lose track of the number of friends you had to bury. So it's a very grim history, but I think that growing up in that environment, and I'm pretty sure Adrian will co-sign what I'm saying, growing up in that kind of environment emotionally makes you stronger to the point to where you can pretty much deal with anything that comes in your direction. So I'm not ashamed of my upbringing. I'm not ashamed of all the death that I had to experience, because it made me more focused and more dedicated and more driven to do the systemic change that I'm doing now.
And Adrian, you're nodding and you look like you have something to say.
Yes, I'm just in total agreement with everything Sharif is saying. And I think the most important thing, as he chimed in as well, is this perseverance. I mean, in those environments, when you see all this deprivation and death around you, you have to have some sort of perseverance within yourself. And I believe my strong point, honestly, was my family. Although I had a lot of difficulties at a very young age with my family, and some things I didn't understand at that time. My family was also very tight knit, and there was a lot of morals and principles that was instilled in me and my siblings at a very young age. My stepdad was a Marine; he was a military man, and my mom and my grandmother owned their own church. So that those things were taught in our household. So even when you stepped outside in the neighborhood, that was my first level of defense, was like the things that I was taught in the home. And then in the neighborhood, you also had to have your guard up times 10, because you would face everything on a daily basis. And I'm talking at pretty much a kid, like before 16 years old, honestly.
And that ultimately, well, some different things came together that led to your involvement with the justice system. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so again, I come from a very strong and tight-knit family. Unfortunately, what happened with my family was addiction. My family became involved in drugs on the usage side of it, and it dismantled my family. Like it truly ripped my family apart, from a dad who worked for B&O Railroad for 39 years and my mother who was a registered nurse who kept our family together. I went to private school growing up. I was in Catholic school all the way up into sixth grade elementary. So my family was really the thing that kept us together. Unfortunately, drugs infiltrated our home. It dismantled my family. And it got to a point that my family went for almost 2 years without having working gas and electric. So at that point, it was,
Wow.
yeah, at that point, my mom was addicted. My dad had basically left because he could not face, I learned later because now he and I, we speak, and I'll tell you the full story, like it comes around 360, but he left because he was ashamed of all the things that he had taught my brothers and I, and he felt like as a man, he didn't live up to those things he taught us himself. So out of embarrassment, he left our home, which caused like a vacuum in our home. My mother was already dealing with addiction. My dad, who was the resounding voice in our house, had left. And my younger brothers and myself, we were just basically left vulnerable, and also felt the obligation as the men of the house, as we were taught by my dad, we were the men of the house to provide for the household. That's where I was raised. Now, unfortunately, I eventually went to a negative way of trying to provide, but I started off at 13 years old working. I got a work, back then, I think you had to get a work permit signed from like your middle school teacher. I was in middle school. So my thing was I would go to middle school every day. I would get out of school. I would immediately go straight to work at the local mall, worked in a restaurant, and catch the bus home maybe like 10, 11 o'clock at night, and then try to cram for homework or tests or whatever else I was doing. Eventually it became too much. I fell asleep in school one day and I was exhausted from working. And I remember when the teacher called my mom, and my mom basically gave me a vicious tongue lashing and told me if I fell asleep again that I was going to have to quit my job. So what I did, what I thought was my wise thinking at that time, I quit my job on my own and started the local hustling. I could make more money. I could kind of adjust my own hours, and I didn't have to worry about falling asleep in school. And my mother, she was going through her own thing. By the time my mother got to the point of recognizing her addiction and battling her addiction, man, that was a process about maybe from 11 to 12 to now I'm maybe 15 to 16 years old, and I'm a little bigger, a little bit more out of my mother's control now, because my life has shifted from being a quiet, introverted kid in a house that loved microscopes and telescopes and things of that nature to now I'm a kid that's full blown in the streets, selling drugs as a way to survive. And
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. And that ultimately led me into a very extensive incarceration stint. My younger brother and I as well, Sharif has met my younger brother. My younger brother was actually one of my co-defendants. He and I was in the same organization together. And we came from a different neighborhood. We began to accomplish so much, and we began to accomplish so much at the street level that it caused a lot of envy amongst the older dealers around that neighborhood. And they started paying people to attack us violently just to try to run us out of the neighborhood. This is typical. Sharif could tell you as well. It was basically a territorial dispute. And we were younger guys, so they felt like we had no right to that money in that area. They tried to run us off, and it came to a thing where it was like fist fights to all out gun battles and shootouts. And that is ultimately what sent me to prison.
Right. Some comments from the chat box. That transition to hustling makes perfect sense to me, especially for a young teenager. These are from Gail, our psychiatric nurse, who helps out on the chat box. I can't imagine what it was like growing up in that environment. I'm so impressed with your resiliency and inner strength. That's to both of you, I think. Yeah, and you told me, you shared with me how that unfolded, how there was a series of attacks and counterattacks and guns shot, bullets everywhere.
Mhm.
And then there was a wrapped up conspiracy charge. So someone
Yes.
died and you were not the shooter it wasn't on you really,
Yes.
that death, but because of the RICO conspiracy charges, the way it
Yes.
wrapped up, you were convicted of that.
Yes. So basically, when I wound up being incarcerated, I went to federal court. The deal that was placed on the table in front of me, I have no issue with sharing. It's what's called a global plea, which means that my co-defendant at the time and myself had to both agree to take a 20-year sentence in federal prison system, and you have to do 85% of your time in the federal prison system. There is no parole or probation or anything of that nature. And if we did not both agree to take that 20-year term at the same time, then we were facing a 360-month to life sentence, and that's 30 years to life. At that time, I think I was 26, 27. And I honestly had to rationalize it to myself, like, well, I'm 26, 27. If I have to do 20 years and I'll come home, at least I'll have enough life. I'll have some life left. That was my actual realization. And to be honest with you, as I told you yesterday, Ms. Morrison, because of the way I was raised in the church and having such strong morals and principles taught to me and my family, it may sound absurd to other people, but I accepted the sentence that I was given because I felt that I knew better than the actions I had taken and the way that I was living my life. So I went through my whole 20-year stint without ever receiving an incident report or an infraction. And I was never bitter. People ask me, Sharif will tell you, I smile all the time anyway. And people, even in prison, will ask me like, man, why are you smiling? And I smiled because I understood. Like, I understood my situation. I understood what I was involved in. And I understood how severe it could have been and the fact that I could have lost my life or had a life sentence. So.
Such a powerful story. Thank you both for sharing. That's a comment from Shireen in the chat box. And, as I hear your story unfold and the turning points that were there for you, the sort of the disintegration of the family with a substance use disorder, your feeling of pressure to support the family, to support yourself. I mean, all of those decisions have an honor to them. They're honorable decisions in that sense.
I appreciate that. And honestly, what you're saying is exactly how I felt. Like it has a lot to do with the way I was raised. My pops, man, he was a military man. He always taught us, like, you guys are the little men of the house. Like, I'm the man of the house while I'm here, but you guys are my little men. You're the man of the house. And when he left, I felt it as a duty to my family to step up and take on that responsibility. And also, I adore my mother. So even with our hardship, I just felt like, hey, somebody has to do something. And that's what my younger brother and I chose to do. And unfortunately, it wasn't the right decision, but at that time, it made the most sense.
And you were children.
Yes, pretty much, right.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sharif, your family was also impacted by the justice system, and you mentioned that a little bit. What else would you like to share?
Well, essentially, it just comes down to resources and what's available. My brother and Adrian's story are pretty similar and pretty parallel. My mother was a single parent, had 7 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. She worked 2 full-time jobs and went to school, so obviously she was never home. And being on someone who had food stamps and had to go through the embarrassment of having to go to the store with the old ripped off dollar bills from the food stamp books, not how the EBT card is now. Mm-hmm. My family used to always get made fun of when we went to the store because everyone knew we were using food stamps. So my brother decided that that wasn't something that he wanted to do. So he decided to, unfortunately, turn to the illegal route. And at the age of 13, he went to Spofford, which is a juvenile prison, essentially. Mm-hmm. And he was in Spofford from the age of 13 until about maybe 16 and a half to 17, which is pretty much the extent how long they can keep you there. Unless you have a bigger charge, the way once you turn 18, they then transfer you to an adult prison. But luckily for him, he didn't have that. Correct. Mm-hmm. But luckily for him, he didn't have that. But when he came back from Spofford, essentially, you have to understand he went in at 13, came out at about 17. So there was no maturity of him between those years. So he came out chronologically at the age of 17, but he was still 13. So unfortunately, reoffended, went to upstate prison, upstate New York in Sing Sing, did a long stint there, came home, no reentry services, reoffended again, went back and went to Attica and did a 10-year stretch. So it pretty much broke my family because we were missing a family member and having to travel 7.5 to 8 hours every weekend, dragging care packages and
Yes.
food and everything else like that on an 8-hour bus trip to the borderline of Canada, traveling 8 hours for an hour visit. Was devastating on my mother, and it was devastating on me seeing my brother like that. And at that early age, I never really understood how come he couldn't just come home. I never understood why we had to leave him there. So going to see him, and I went to see him every month, and going to see him and leaving him there every single time broke my heart. Because I never understood how come he couldn't come home. But when he did come home, he was able to get a job with one of the family friends that he knew from back in the day. So he was able to gain employment, but it's not going to be on the books employment. And that's where the problem lies. But we'll get more into that, as we go further along down the conversation. But just seeing my brother go through that, seeing him struggle when he came out, seeing the level of anxiety, the fear, the frustration of not being able to do what he wants because he doesn't have the resources or the support. It was devastating. It was very, very difficult to watch him go through that. I think it made me more hard as far as my emotions go. But fortunately, I was able to link up with an agency that allows me to turn that anger that I had to facilitate and help others. So I'm very, very fortunate for my brother's story, because if it wasn't for him and what he went through, honestly, I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing right now.
Well, I think a lot of people should be grateful for that, and kudos to you for taking your passion, taking your anger, that feeling of brokenness, and putting it to good use. So Adrian, you live with post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. Tell us about that, how it came about, what symptoms you experienced.
Honestly, I had never heard of post-traumatic stress disorder before my incarceration. And the different thing about the federal prison system is it's the feds. So it's all across the country, and you have people of all different crime categories that you could ever possibly think of. One of my closest friends there was an actual doctor who was incarcerated for insurance fraud, right? For Medicaid frauds. And this guy was a doctor. He was one of my best friends there. And I had another guy who I used to work out with who was a veteran. And he was from a completely different environment than me, completely different part of the country, which is the wildest thing about the feds, because you interact with these people and you become friends with people who you probably would have never had a conversation with, right? And this guy was a veteran. And as he and I began to talk and, became friends, I explained to him some things that I had seen in my life growing up. And he almost compared what I was telling him to him being in actual war. And I never saw the parallel, never drew the parallel. And when he said that, it started making me think, because in my mind, because of the environment I grew up in, the violence that I saw was normal. It's what happens in these neighborhoods. It was normal to me. And when he explained it to me from his perspective as being a vet, it shifted my focus. So he gave me some information about PTSD, and I started reading it, and I immediately began to identify with a lot of the things that I read. I didn't actually get diagnosed until I came home and started seeing a therapist on my own, which was also a struggle, because in most African-American communities, even talking about or speaking about seeing a therapist, you are definitely deemed a crazy person. If not, why would you be seeing a therapist? But what I needed for my own personal healing was someone to listen to my story, view and examine the things that I had been through in my life, and help me filter through it and understand. And that's where it helped me at.
That's so interesting. So it didn't even come from a doctor. It came from your interacting with other folks there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Interesting. Comment in the chat box. This story sounds all too familiar. So many inner city youth going through that. And yes, there's a real stigma attached to mental health in minority communities. Thank you for that, Lacey. Absolutely. So Sharif, do you have anything you'd like to add on?
Oh, no, I mean, he definitely, when it comes to mental illness and things like that, when it comes to incarceration, I think it's best that those individuals who have that firsthand lived experience speak their story. So there's nothing I can add on to what Adrian said that's going to make it any better than what he said just then. So I'm going to leave that alone to him.
And also, Sharif, I got to bring you into this because I didn't have this recollection, and so I started working at Alliance of Disability Advocates in my former job in Raleigh with Sharif, and our former executive director that worked there was a vet himself, Mr. Dave Wickstrom, and he and I began to converse about some things too, and he brought a lot of things to light for me as far as therapy and going that route as well, and it helped me. I would say it helped me heal a lot. It helped me allow my walls to come down, because in environments that I had grew up in, it was always, you have these little catchphrases, trust no one, keep your eye, keep your head on a swivel, and all these little different things. What ultimately, what it does is it builds this barrier around you where you absolutely trust no one for no reason whatsoever. You actually enter most relationships with people not trusting them and making that person earn your trust. And that's just what it was. When I began to talk to Dave and have different conversations with him, it helped me relinquish some of those things, open up more, and be able to tell my story with confidence.
Well, that's, you do tell it very well. You can tell that you've gotten comfortable with that journey and comfortable in your own skin on that. And I think, the courage it takes to share that with people, especially if your community doesn't support it overall, it goes such a long way.
It does. For me, I feel like during my times that I was in the environment that I was, and I feel like the devastation that I caused because of my actions to others and others' families, I think it's the most noble thing I can do, is share my story and hoping that somehow it touches someone's heart, some little young man who may be struggling with the same thing or something similar, and just giving people hope that it is an opportunity to do something different. And Sharif, he joked and he teases me, calls me Hollywood all the time, but I present myself in a certain way because I want to give hope to people so that when they see me and they hear my story, they understand, wow, this is a guy who grew up in the inner city of Baltimore, was shot 7 times, was incarcerated for 20 years, went through all these different things in his house, was a product of addiction in the household, and yet and still he went through all these different transitions and came out on the other side of it whole and still walking through the process, and now in a position where my actual career and job is giving hope, tangible hope to other individuals. I honestly, I can't be any more blessed than what I am. So if I can have some way of some opportunity to be able to give that to someone else, I'm like ecstatic about that.
Well, the reason we do Thursdays with NAMI is because we're trying to have these conversations, build community and build conversations on mental health. And what you're doing from my perspective is redefining words like courage, redefining words like transparency, because we grew up with a certain notion, old school ideas.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you. All righty. Next question is for Sharif. What were your thoughts the first time you met Adrian, and how did you give him the support he needed?
Okay. Well, Adrian and I both work for what's called the Center for Independent Living. And essentially what that is a federally funded organization or agency that specializes in giving services to individuals that have disabilities for free. And one of the 5 core services that we must do as a CIL is considered transitional services. And it can be a transition from anything that is deemed an institution, whether it's actual jail and prison or group homes or nursing homes or assisted living facilities. We deem all of those as institutions in the CIL world. So Dave Wickstrom, who was and Adrian's former executive director, instead of him going the nursing home route with the transitional services, he decided, there's a federal compound that's maybe about a 45-minute drive from the office. So he was like, let's go there to see if we can start working with people coming out of prison that have a disability. And Dave was actually the first one who met Adrian before I did. So when Dave came back and he asked, you know, who felt comfortable going into prison to help individuals, obviously I jumped at it with both feet. And then he told me, he said, look, we have a gentleman that's there. His name's Adrian Boone. He's been incarcerated. At that point, it was probably about 17 years. And he said he never received a write-up or an infraction, which is almost impossible to do because you can get an infraction for just looking at a CO the wrong way. And he received 0. So Dave Wickstrom said, you know what? I think I might consider hiring him for the agency. He's about a year and a half out from his release. I'm going to need you to go and help him get acclimated. So my first time going into Butner, I went through the religious service area. I saw my escort who escorted me into the building. And then in the religious service, Adrian is in there reading. He's by himself. There's no crowd. There's nobody around him. There's a whole bunch of other individuals just standing around doing nothing. And he's just off to the side reading. And then he came up, he knew I was coming. So we introduced ourselves to each other. And obviously, due to the fact that both of us are the same religion, it dropped all the barriers immediately. And then he and I started to converse just about being from the North, because we're both Northerners here in the South. So we sat around and talked about that for a little while.
And if I could, you're both
Sure.
followers of Islam, just so people know.
That's correct.
In case they didn't catch that earlier.
That's right. We are both Muslims, both practicing Muslims. And so we discussed the North and just wanted to talk about everything else that wasn't attached to incarceration, that wasn't attached to the job, just getting to know him on a personal level. And from that conversation, I saw him every single Friday for probably about a good 16 months. I would go in and see him. And we have this philosophy that ADA has coined an IRP, which stands for Individualized Reentry Plan. So instead of using the federal government or the state's model, which is cookie cut for reentry, and if you don't fit into that mold, too bad. This was more of meeting someone where they are, asking them what they thought they needed for their successful reentry, and then assisting them with that. So for Adrian, because he was going to be coming and working for ADA, technology was going to be the first thing I had to get him acclimated to, because him being down for that long, and down for those who don't know means incarcerated, for him being down for that many years, he never saw a smartphone the way we have. So I had to bring in literal paper, because you can't bring technology into prison. So I would bring in papers and manuals, iOS systems for dummies, the difference between Android and Apple, how to work the entire system. Because when he got out, we were going to give him a smartphone. So he had to know how to work those. We spoke about phone etiquette. I trained him on how to answer the phones professionally, giving him an idea of what the agency was, what we do, and then what we expect him to do for us or with us when he was to be released. So we met up every week, 16 months. I'm not saying that all of that time was about training and things like that. A lot of time, it was just about just simple conversation, because sometimes when individuals are incarcerated, that outside personal connection is all they have. Sometimes people don't get visits for years. So it was just us just getting acclimated and getting comfortable with each other, helping him learn. And Adrian's a very, very fast learner. It wasn't a situation where I was bringing him information and he threw it to the side. He read it. He went through everything, and we would have conversations about what I gave him the week before. And then we would talk about him learning how to ride the bus system, because he was new to North Carolina and he wasn't coming home with a car. So he had to learn how to get around. So we worked on him learning the bus route system on paper before he was to be released. And Adrian will tell you this, we got to Thanksgiving when he was supposed to have got released. And we were happy. The whole agency was ecstatic. We had his apartment set up. His office was set up. Everything was good to go. And unfortunately, due to some bureaucratic nonsense where the halfway house in Charlotte closed, I think it was about what, like a week before your release, Adrian, that they told him,
Yes.
you're not going home for 6 more months.
Yeah.
And I saw him that following Friday. And he was so worried that because this happened, that ADA was going to essentially retract the job offer and pull back all the services. But if anything, it was just the opposite. We went forward with the services and we made sure that his apartment was still going to be paid for when he got out. And
Wow.
when he got out, I made it my business to be there. And that wasn't even about me working for ADA. That was me being there for my brother. So I was there when he got out. And he got out. And in prison, you know, you have to hold your emotions in and you have to have this tough facade or you're considered prey to others. But once he stepped out of that gate and was outside the wall, he let it go. And that was fine. It was all about support at that point.
Yeah.
And I took him to the halfway house. I took him to get something to eat first because he hasn't had some real food in over 20 years. So I took him and his brothers to eat. And then I took him to the halfway house. We took him to CVS and bought him some toiletries and things like that he needed.
Wait, you got to talk about, we was in the Target because so he took me to it's like a super Target or something. It's like this really massive Target by Triangle Town Center. And this is my first day in society after almost 20 years. So we went in Target. I had not seen so many different selections or type of like granola bars and stuff. And I was stuck. Like, honestly, I had to back away from the shelf and look. And Sharif, my little brothers, they like jokingly laughed a little bit. It was like, man, get whatever you want. And I honestly did not know what I wanted. Like, it was too many things to choose from because on the commissary list, you only had like the same 2 flavor granola bars for like the last 20 years. So, so like I had to take a step. Yeah, I had to take a step back and look at the aisle in Target, like, and I just like, I don't even know what to get. And they just laughed and was like, don't worry, take your time, you'll get it. So yeah.
So tell me about, let's backtrack a little bit to that point where you left the prison and you were finally able to let down those walls. Talk about that, Adrian.
Man, it was absolutely one of the most emotional things I have ever went through, because even during my incarceration, I may have had emotional things that upset me or times that I felt like I wanted to cry. I never did. And without notice, the minute I walked out of the door, I will not forget the officer said, man, good luck. Hope I never see you again. And when I left out the door, Sharif and my 2 younger brothers were standing there, and it's like I had no control of it. It just came pouring out like in an emotional rush, like, shh. And I just started crying like really, really bad. And I remember my brother was like, it's okay, man, you home now. Like, you okay, bro, you home now. And I just told him, I said, wait a minute, man, just give me a minute. Let me get this out and I'll be all right. But just give me this minute. Let me get this out. And Sharif gave me some dap, as we say. He gave me a handshake and hugged me and was like, go ahead, bro. And I just had to put my head down for a minute while all 3, Sharif and my 2 brothers, they gathered around me. They gave me like a big group hug, and I just put my head down. I cried. I got it out my system, and we got in the car. Like Sharif said, he took me to get something to eat and took me shopping. And I went to work the next day. Started working. It's on since then.
Wow, the next day. Wait,
Yes.
I love that you were able to make space for this. Like, give me a minute. I've got some emotions to deal with right now.
I had to. I felt it and I knew it. It's like it was just coming out of me. Like I didn't realize that I had so many pinned up emotions for so long, because again, that was normal in that environment. You don't cry. You're not an emotional person, and you have all these different guards up. And when I finally walked out of that door, I felt that the people that were out there waiting for me also offered me enough comfort to just get it out. And even my brother them felt, my little brother, they still kind of rough around there. It's like, come on, bro, you home, it's okay. Like, I was like, nah, man, give me a minute. I need to get this out. Like, I've had this penned up for too long. So let me get this out. And that's what I did.
18 years. That makes a lot of sense to me. So, and from that point, you turned your life experience, a difficult life experience, into a tool for helping other people and a successful career. While while getting in touch with PTSD, while getting in touch with mental health challenges. How'd you do that?
Well, you know, when I thought about my incarceration overall, and Sharif will tell you, being someone who was a mental health, a reentry advocate, it says the most important time that you're in your incarceration is like the first day. You're supposed to start planning your life out. Oftentimes people wait until they're in the last 6 months, last year, whatever, and that by that time it's too late. And the reason why I say that is because it's not only what you do in the institution, it's also your mind frame and your thinking. And for myself, I understood that where I was, the choices and the decisions that I had made had led me to where I was. If I wanted something different, then I had to change everything about myself and everything that was previous. And that's exactly what I did. I started a lot of self-examination. As Sharif said, I'm Muslim, so I got heavily involved in my religion. And basically my reputation in every institution that I went to was, that's Boone. He goes to work, he goes to school, and he works out. I worked 2 jobs while incarcerated and went to college. I earned biomedical equipment certification. I'm a certified biomedical equipment technician. I'm a certified heat and ventilation and air conditioning technician. I have an environmental protection agency certification. I am a sports nutritionist and fitness trainer. So I did everything I could possibly do to make sure that I could find gainful employment when I came home. I felt like if one door closed and I didn't have that skill, let me get another certification so I have another skill. And that's just what I did the entire time I was incarcerated. And when I first met Mr. Dave Wickstrom, the conversation started between he and I, and what ultimately led me to working for Alliance of Disability Advocates is that Mr. Wickstrom had the idea of creating a in-office biomed shop. So this was going to be a shop for all individuals who were consumers of Alliance of Disability Advocates, who may have had issues with their power wheelchair, manual wheelchair, small medical equipment or whatever. Because I was a certified technician in those things, I can make these adjustments and repairs, help our consumers, and also help the agency. So that was the guise of how I originally began to work for Alliance of Disability Advocates. Came into the office, shared an office with Sharif, started doing direct consumer work, and honestly fell in love with the job. Sharif will tell you, while I worked at ADA, I worked under every grant within that agency. I entered the agency as a travel trainer, which is teaching individuals with disabilities how to utilize the fixed route transit system. I went from that to working TCLI, which is Transition to Community Living Initiative. I worked under every grant possible, but I did this because I wanted to gain as many skills as I possibly could, and I wanted to be a well-rounded employee. So if someone else couldn't handle their obligations or more duties, I wanted to be able to be the guy to step in and take over that responsibility, because I always had a healthy work ethic. I created a healthy work ethic for myself while incarcerated, working 2 jobs and going to school. So I always had a drive to hustle, but now I understood, like, you know what, let me hustle in a different way. Let me knock these classes down. And when I transitioned home, I did the same thing. Sharif will tell you, I worked at ADA, got off at ADA and went to a second job at a hotel right up the street of the Embassy Suites and worked banquets for years, because I didn't really have a social life. And for me, I was like, what better way? I can make more money instead of just sitting around the house. And I was on home monitor for like 6 months. So it gave me a little bit of like liberty to be outside for a little longer. So I worked the second job.
All right. Yeah, when you talk about all that you've learned and done and worked, I get a little exhausted listening to the list.
Really?
But now you see why, his story is the diamond in the rough, is the gem that everybody is searching for, because 99% of reentry stories don't end like Adrian's. And that's just a testament to the work that he put in and utilizing the supports that we had in place for him. He did all this. He took full advantage of it, and he didn't have to. He didn't have to. He could have easily came home and said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to go back to what I was used to. But Adrian will tell you, the first conversation that he and I had was, when he gets released, I said, you can't go back to Baltimore.
He did.
Under no circumstances can you go back. You have to stay in North Carolina. And he was like, I'm not from here. And I'm like, I'm not from here either. But I know I can't go back to New York. I know you can't go back to Baltimore. So get used to being a Southerner, and you see he's still here. So it's an credit to what he was able to accomplish when he was incarcerated and what he did after. Because if he wasn't able to rack up the accommodations and the qualifications and all the certificates that he was able to accumulate and did positive things with his time when he was incarcerated, I can guarantee you Dave wouldn't have gave him a second look. He wouldn't have. So this was his reward, per se, for lack of a better expression, for his dedication and his hard work in an environment that can beat you down emotionally, mentally, physically at times. Prison is made to break people. It's not meant to rehabilitate. It is meant to break you or make you a better criminal. That's what the system is there for. But he decided to do something else with his time. So I'm proud of him. He's one of my, to date, he is my most successful reentry story to date.
Thanks, Sharif.
I'm not surprised. It sounds like, Adrian, your attitude and your experience, plus the program that you, and the relationships that you were able to come out to, those were both best case scenarios. You and then ADA and what they were able to wrap services around you.
Yes.
Yeah. So Sharif, what would it take to have more Adrian stories?
I don't know if the list is long enough, and I don't know if we have enough time, but one, I will say programs like how we have at ADA with this individualized reentry plan. To date, we're the only center for independent living in America that does this kind of work. So what we need for more successful stories like Adrian's, one, systemic change. That has to be the number one thing. We need systemic change when it comes to reentry, whether it's on a federal level, local jail level, or state level. People have to upend and pretty much just reroute and reboot this whole reentry plan that they think works, because it doesn't. Especially on the state level, their release plan is $40 in a bus ticket, and is usually to the county that you caught your charge in. And 9 times out of 10, an individual is not even familiar with that county. They just happen to be there when they caught their charge. So now you're going to drop someone in an environment where they know nothing about the environment. They know nothing about agencies that are there that can support them. They know nothing about employment opportunities that might be available to them. They do not know how to access resources like Medicaid and SNAP and SSI or SSDI. They don't know anything about that. So if you're going to drop me in an environment where I'm forced to survive, I'm going to revert to what I know best. And that's going to be illegal activity. And I'm going to reoffend, and the jail wins. So we have to change things systemically. That's one thing. Two, I think
Can I ask a question, Sharif?
Sure.
So I'm sent back to the county where I was arrested. Is that usually?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Got it.
That's correct. You are sent back to the county where you caught your charge at, which
Got it.
makes no sense, but that's the way the system is set up. We're going to need, obviously, financial support, because in order to push this initiative forward, like any program, you have to have some kind of financial sustainability. So for programs like ours, we're going to need a line item on the state budget to be able to keep this program going forward. But I think that the most important thing, well, two sides to this. One, in order to have successful individuals like Adrian, we need individuals that have the same drive that he has. Because we can offer all the resources in America. If someone wants to reoffend, they're going to reoffend. So we have to instill hope in individuals early. Like Adrian said, unless you're guaranteed like a life sentence with no parole, or you got a triple life or something like that, to where you know that there's a good chance you're never going to get out. If you have a release date, no matter how long it is down the line, your reentry starts the second you walk in, because you have to start planning for your release. And the sad part is you have to start planning for your release, because the prisons are not going to help you.
No,
You have to start planning for your own, which is why agencies like ADA are so important, that we can go in and give individuals the support that we know that they need. And it's not just generic support. It's about empowering people to do good things with their own reentry. Because once you're incarcerated, besides your clothes, the other thing that they strip from you is your name. And now you're just a number. You're just another face in the crowd, and that's it. But this IRP empowers individuals to make choices that they think they need for their successful reentry, whether it's housing, employment, benefits, mental health connections, mental illness counseling, benefits coordination. The gamut, the list goes on and on. So we need more individuals like Adrian for us to have more successful individuals. But on the flip side of that, we also need society to be more understanding and more accepting to these individuals that are coming home, and give individuals the resources and at least a fair chance to try to be successful. Because if I'm running a marathon and you are holding my leg back and everybody else is a million miles down the road, it doesn't matter how fast I run, I'm never gonna catch them. You have to have things on a level playing field. So until we can have all of these things lined up, we're not gonna have successful stories like Adrian. You're gonna have what 45% of the state does: reoffend, come out, no resources, reoffend, and go back. And people have to understand that when it comes to these rural counties, to where that jail or that prison is the only means of income. And when I mean the only means of income, I mean that all of the COs live in that town that the prison is in. So if me giving you reentry services is going to affect my bottom line or affect my paycheck, I'm not going to do that. Because at the end of the day, I need to be able to live my life on my own paycheck. So that's just the way it goes. And as you pull up the slide right now, prison policy, prison is $1 billion business. It's $1 billion business, to where you don't have to pay the workers, but what, Adrian, what, 25, 30 cents an hour? I mean, yes. that's like sweatshop times 10,000.
I worked 2 jobs, and my top pay per hour for each of those jobs, and I was considered a grade 1. I was considered like a senior level guy, had some experience, received the top pay, was 40 cents an hour. So in my logic, I was like, well, if I can only get 40 cents an hour, let me get 2 jobs, work hard, become the top paid guy there. At least that's 80 cents an hour if I double up. And that's just how I looked at it.
Now imagine 80 cents an hour. 80 cents an hour to work, 80 cents. And it's not like the jobs that they're having him do are going to be mediocre minimum work. They're going to try to break his back.
Oh yeah.
For that 80
Absolutely.
cents.
Yeah.
They're going to try to break him for that 80 cents because you're expendable. As soon as you drop off and you physically can't do it no more, guess what? I have 700 other inmates standing in line ready to get back into that mass
waiting to take
line.
That grade 1 job as well. Waiting to take the 40 cents an hour. Yeah.
Right. So 40 cents.
That is unbelievable. Adrian, what are your thoughts about changing the system, helping more people succeed with reentry?
Reentry is definitely needed. I agree 110% with Sharif that I believe an individualized reentry plan is the way to go. Because even in institutions and correctional institutions, when a reentry department presents to an audience, it's normally blanketed information. It's a bunch of handouts, copies, runoffs that they drafted from the internet somewhere, and it's very generic information. You may sit there for an hour at a reentry seminar and it has nothing to do with you or anything that you see yourself doing in the future. So when I had the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Chris Rivera first, and then Dave Wickstrom, until I met Sharif, it was all about, Adrian, what do you want to do when you leave this place? What do you see yourself doing? And when I was able to have that conversation with Sharif and I laid out for Sharif all that I had done on my own, it gave him something to work with. Where he looked at it like, whoa, we got a nice amount of meat on the bones here. I got a few things I can work with when it comes down to me doing my job and figuring out which direction to point you in for employment. So for me, first thing was employment. That's the first thing I thought about. I was like, well, if all else fails, I got to be able to have a job that I can fend for myself, be able to take care of myself, feed myself, clothe myself. The basic necessities was all I was concerned with. If I could get a job, one job that could take care of the basic necessities, I could go hard, work a second job to get some of the things I like or want. That was my understanding. So I believe that an individual needs a strong support system. First of all, you have to have a support system, whether it's friends, family, or organization like Alliance of Disability Advocates, who let me know while I was in that institution that I had a support system and I had something waiting for me on the outside. So even though I went that entire time without ever receiving any infractions until I met Sharif, once I met Sharif, I had more drive to complete my goal of not receiving any infractions and getting home and making something of my life. Because now, and I don't even know if Sharif knows this, when Sharif used to come in that institution every week for that 16 months straight, what he brought me was tangible hope. It was something I could see coming to fruition. It was something else I was working towards, which was always like the way I did my time. If I was in school and I knew my biomedical certification, it took 5 years, and you could not receive an infraction or they would kick you out of the program if you had 4.5 years left. Now, if you had already completed 4.5 years and you caught one infraction, you would be kicked out the program and your 6 months to 5 years didn't matter, right? So I would do my time by those things like, okay, this program takes 5 years. I'm locked into this for 5 years. And then the next program takes 3 years. And that's just how I maximize my time. And ultimately for me, it was a reward at the end because I gained another certification, another marketable job skill. So for me, it starts with the individual. No reentry, nothing will help a person if that individual has not sat down and looked at themselves and did some sort of self-examination. It starts with the individual. That individual has to want a better life for themselves. Me, I simply wanted a different life. I wanted a better life than what I was living. I wanted something different for myself. I wanted to be a person who made my mother, father, and grandmother proud. My parents spent their hard-earned money and sent me to private school. I sometimes feel like I failed them because I went to private school. So I wanted to give them something to look at me and say, you know what? Through all that he went through, I'm proud of this young man. So that is my drive. That's what pushes me, and that's what caused me to continue to strive. And when I met Sharif and Dave, it just was a perfect match because I was already on that road and facing that trajectory, and they came in with their influence, and it just catapulted me to in a different direction than I expected, but I'm proud of it. I'm happy with it.
I can see why.
Adrian, even if you didn't tell me that I was bringing you tangible hope, I already knew. And Adrian will tell you, Adrian was my first consumer within probably a month after me going to see him. It went from him to 70 more people that was lining up for reentry services because they saw what Adrian was doing. And I'm pretty sure the question was, well, who's that tall guy helping you and things like that? And then he told him what we were doing. And then it's just like, oh, there's an agency out there that actually can help you with something. And they're actually credible because a lot of agencies will come in and they'll say, we're going to do this and this and this and do nothing of the sort. I've always been a strong believer in being completely transparent. If I can't do something for you, I'm going to tell you. Everything that I told Adrian I was going to be able to do for him, I did. And I was able to have that conversations with him about some things that I wasn't going to be able to do. But it's all about keeping things, as people say, 100 or transparent. Once you gain the respect and the trust of an individual who is incarcerated, you will never lose it until you do something to lose it. But gaining that trust is so difficult. But as you can imagine, in that environment, like Adrian told you, you can't trust anybody. And that's people on the inside and people coming in from the outside. You can't trust no one until they show and prove. And once I showed and proved the work that I was doing with Adrian, it spread. Butner has 5 prisons in the compound, 5. From the highest level security to the camp, 5 prisons. And I had consumers and clients in every single one of the prisons, and it all started with the work that I was doing with Adrian. So it's just about giving that tangible hope of, yes, you have an agency that can give you the support, you have an agency that can link you up with the resources and give you everything that you need. So now there's no excuses if you go out and you reoffend. You can't blame lack of resources, lack of information. You can't blame any of that because Adrian would tell you the IRP, everything is laid out like a red carpet, where the resources are, who to contact, how to contact, if something costs money, where to get the money from. It's a breakdown of every single resource that they're asking for down to the T. So all they have to do is follow the IRP and things would be okay. But like I said, it all comes down to that person's individual choice. And Adrian decided he didn't want to go back. And I'm
Yeah.
glad he didn't, because we would have hurt him. We
Sharif,
invested too much time.
Sharif used to threat. Well, as Sharif let everyone know, he is what, 6'6", and how much you weigh?
Now, well, then I was a healthy 280. Now I'm
So-
probably about a good 320. So still a big guy.
6'6", 280. Looking at me, I'm 5'11", like 190, telling me you better not mess up. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay. But like long before I met, actually before I met Sharif, and I will tell you my first apprehension with Sharif. Sharif and I hit it off well in our first meeting. When we started getting into reentry and talks about ADA as a program and an individualized reentry plan and how we were going to work on my reentry, Sharif will tell you initially I was a little apprehensive when it came down to reentry services, because I had done research on my own, and I probably had a list of maybe 75 to 100 different local reentry agencies in the area of Raleigh, Durham, and other counties. And I hand wrote letters to each one of these places. I would highlight it and write the date beside it that I actually mailed the letter out. Out of that 100 agencies, I think I might have received 5 replies back, and all the replies were, I had served too much time, my release date was too far off. Every one of the letters had some reason why I could not receive services from them. So at that point, I was kind of like, this reentry thing is a sham. Like, I just really didn't see any benefit to it. And then I met Sharif. Yep.
Interesting. So some of the agencies, they're sort of taking the low-hanging fruit. They're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The hard to serve aren't really getting service.
Yes.
That's how sad.
Well, you have to understand, Peg, that it's like that because 99% of the agencies that do reentry are doing post-release. They're waiting for you to get released, and then they're going to wait for you to come down. It's like NC Works and go and try to go into a temp agency and finally learn how to work a computer and things. It's too late at that point. You are way too far behind. Society has not stopped. It will not stop. Things are going to consistently change. So you have to be on the ball way before you get out in order to be successful. Because like I said, if you wait, the anxiety of you being out is going to be overwhelming. And then it's like, I have so many things I have to do. How am I going to get this and that? I don't have a job. I don't have a car. How am I going to travel? Where do I get food stamps from? Can I even get food stamps? Can I get Section 8? Like, there's so many questions that people have, and they have nobody to turn to. Nobody. Or they'll turn to what we consider in the projects as the knowledgeable person in the hood, that, you know, you'll go to somebody who thinks they know everything and they know everything wrong, and they're going to steer you in the wrong direction. So you have to have that connection to agencies like mine, and like I know Adrian still will be once he gets it up and running the way he wants it to be. But that's the importance of catching people way before they get released. If you wait until they get out, you are at least about a good 5 to 6 years behind the 8 ball.
Sure. And with mental health challenges, hopefully they're released with a plan that way.
Yes.
Yeah. So
not happening. Even with mental health, they're not being released with a plan at all. They're just being released to the streets. I'm telling you. I'm telling you, they're being released to the streets. They are.
You know, Peg, like, and my thing overall with individuals who are incarcerated and being released is that a vast majority go through that entire term of incarceration and being released with mental health issues that are never diagnosed.
Wow.
This would explain a lot of the issues with conflict resolution, not knowing how to resolve conflict without it leading to violence, or violence being the initial thought before you even try to resolve the conflict. Like, all of those different things, I can pretty much put a finger on it that it's some mental health in there somewhere along the line that individual has dealt with, saw, or faced some sort of trauma that has been unaddressed.
Well, we know that folks with serious mental illness are dramatically overrepresented in jails and prisons.
Yes.
Isn't there some kind of intake assessment where they try to figure that out? Or is it not effective?
It's not effective. That is a good word. It's not effective. That's a well way to put it.
That's a very nice way of putting it. Because
Yes.
believe me, that's the non-PC version is, yeah. So we'll leave it on the PC version. Yes, it's not productive. We'll just leave it at that.
All right. Well, on that note, I really like the way the conversation is flowing. I think we're going to skip the video of the week, but I will take a moment to give a shout out to our volunteers tonight, especially Gail Pruitt, our psychiatric nurse who's on the chat box, and Bria Motley, our St. Aug's work study student who's always helping us out on Thursday night too. Thanks for doing all that important work behind the scenes. And thank you so much to our guests, Sharif and Adrian, for spending your evening with us and sharing so much of your story and your insight. Really appreciate your time and your courage. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it in the Facebook comments if you're on Facebook Live, or in the Q&A box if you're on Zoom. We've got one queued up right here. This is for Adrian. How did you avoid infractions in a system that was trying to break you?
Well, the way I avoid infractions is by the reputation that I created for myself. In that system, I was known as the guy who basically minded his business, went to work, and I stayed in school. Like I said, I worked 2 jobs, and that was the kind of like the routine that a lot of the officers were familiar with seeing me. I always kept it. Like I said, I always was a person who was taught to move with intention and purpose. And even in that environment, I never was a guy who lollygagged around in a hallway, who was ever in a circle kicking it with the fellas. That just was not my mind frame or my way of thinking. And I felt like removing myself from those situations and being solely responsible for my activity and what I did or did not do was the way for me to control what I could in that environment. So staying busy with work was one way. Staying busy in whatever college or school or program that they had at that time is another thing that helped me avoid a lot of nonsense. And honestly, you have some officers, as I told Peg, who do come to work with the disposition that they come to destroy your day. I was smart enough that I knew that that was their disposition. So knowing that, I avoided them. And that's just all I did. Not in a way where they would notice it, so it seemed like I was afraid or intimidated by them, but I'm smart enough to know how to avoid them without them knowing that I'm avoiding.
I like the language you used when you told me about that, the everyday jerks.
Yeah, that's exactly how we looked at them. It was like guys who came to work and just like intentionally was a jerk to you for no reason whatsoever. It could be something as simple as, so we wore uniforms in federal prison, and if your uniform wasn't what they considered neat, then that was something that they could stop you for and actually give you an infraction. So I knew these little things that these officers would tend to use against individuals to kind of disrupt their day. And I always thought ahead of them. So if I knew that was something that they would stop a person for and harass them about, okay, oh, well, that's nothing. Let me keep my uniform clean, my belt up and my pants tight and everything like in order. So when you see me, I don't give you a reason to stop me unless you just really want to annoy me. And at that time, I had taken enough conflict resolution classes and things of that nature where I knew how to keep my mouth closed and mind my business, because ultimately my goal was getting home safe to my family. And that's where I stayed. That's where my focus stayed.
So Sharif, you're working with people who are currently in that situation. How do you encourage them? I've already had infractions and I feel like I'm behind the 8 ball. Adrian was ahead of the game pretty consistently. How do I turn it around?
Well, like I said, so like Adrian alluded to earlier, it's just all about instilling hope in an individual. If you're locked up and you're down and you have nothing but despair, you're gonna act out. You're gonna assault staff. You're gonna assault other inmates and things like that. You're just gonna want to be that nuisance because you're having a bad time. So you want to make everybody else's time just as difficult. So speaking to individuals and just giving them that empowerment, you'd be surprised when you give somebody their power back, what happens? It's a remarkable change. You can literally see the light in their eyes start to brighten. Like, oh, well, you're asking me what I want, not telling me what I have to do and telling me this is what I need for my reentry and telling me you're actually valuing my opinion. And they're invested after that point. You have them hook, line, and sinker. They're fully invested at that point. Mm-hmm. So even if someone has infractions and things like that, that's fine. ADA is not saying that we're going to be able to offer employment within the agency for everybody that we come in contact with. We're not. Adrian was a one-off. He was a one-off. We're probably never going to have someone like that again, that we're going to be able to offer direct employment with the agency because of what they were doing when they were incarcerated positively. However, the IRPs are still going to be individualized. So if an individual is looking for employment, it's up to the team to find employment opportunities in that county that they're being released to, and lining them up with all the resources in that county. So regardless of how many infractions someone might have and all the rest of that, if they have a release date pending, whatever how long it is down the line, we're going to start doing IRPs and start doing independent living skills with them, like mock job interviews, how to write resumes,
Yes.
how to write cover letters. I tell my individuals, you should have 2 resumes. And they look at me like, why? You should have a resume for what you did before you got incarcerated, and you better have a resume for what you did when you were incarcerated. Because we know that employers, now, fortunately, they remove the have you ever been convicted of a felony off of their application. So it at least levels the playing field to some extent. However, every single employer is going to do a background check. So your felony will come up. And you're going to have something saying, well, this is what I did when I was here. I got this certification, high school graduate, college, HVAC, whatever it is. But you have to have a resume for what you were doing inside to show that you were using your time constructively. So it's just things like that, we try to give information to individuals and work with them and let them know, no matter how bleak you think this situation is, one, there's somebody who's going through a lot worse. And there's resources out there. You just have to, A, have an agency like mine that's going to connect you to them, and then take advantage of that opportunity if you're wise. And I tell people all the time, and Adrian will tell you this, when I was working in Butner, I told anybody I was working with, I said, I will work with you and do this IRP. But if I give you this IRP and you go out into society and you reoffend and I see you back in here, don't come back to me asking me for more assistance, because what can I do except give you the same IRP again? So take advantage of the situation when you have it. So
Right.
That's what I told all my guys.
And I would also say, to add to Sharif's point, is just telling individuals to think beyond right now. Think beyond the situation that you are currently in, because that's one of the things that was a constant reinforcement to myself. Think beyond right now. Think beyond the situation that you are currently in, because that situation is so grim and bleak that people will get caught up in the everyday going on. And it's like the everyday things that happen in prison, people will become a part of that system. It's easy to get pulled in and become a part of that direct system. And it's easier for individuals who were already introduced to a way of thinking and a lust for immediate gratification. This is what happens to a lot of individuals who sell drugs, become addicted to the lust of immediate gratification. You want something now, your hustle and the ability affords you the ability to get it right then and there when you want it. And then you place that individual into an institution, and they, with that same reference, that same way of thinking, where they're not thinking about their future, because even in the streets, they didn't expect to live to be 21 or 18 years old. So the fact that they have lived that long, you have an individual who has not even planned for life beyond a point of 16, 18 to 20 years old. So now you are actually an adult in a situation and you're not thinking about your future. So I would always tell individuals, please think beyond your right now. Think beyond where you are right now.
And not just that, once, and Adrian can attest to this, because we had a gentleman that we were both working with reentry, and we taught him how to use a smartphone. And the first thing that he asked the phone was,
oh, wow,
what are they serving in the prison that I just left? And it's like, you have to separate yourself. Once you walk out of those walls, I understand that institutionalism, that mindset is there. I understand it's embedded and is driven home every single day when you're incarcerated. But once you leave prison, prison's behind you. And Adrian and I, we paused for a second and then looked at each other and shook our heads like, this guy is so institutionalized, he's really concerned. about what they're having in the prison he just left, but you're free. You have access to any food you want to get your hands on. And Adrian and I both told him, like, listen, don't ask the phone that. Think about your freedom. Stop looking backwards. You keep looking backwards, you're gonna run into your past. Stop looking backwards. Focus on what's ahead of you, like Adrian said, and try to get the support that you need, whatever it might be, whether it's mental health, whether it's just a SIL, whether it's help with your disability, whatever it might be. Seek those supports. Search for those resources, or get an agency like mine that will do it for you, and then take full advantage of it. Now, not saying it's going to work 100% of the time, but I'm pretty willing to bet dollars to donuts that for those individuals who do not have a reentry plan, it's almost guaranteed within 1 year they're going to have some kind of contact with the police on some level. It's almost guaranteed. And that's with the most family input and the family support. Because a lot of individuals that are coming out, especially like sexual offenders and things like that, there are no family supports for them. Their family has shunned them completely. So they're on their own completely. And not just sexual felonies, any felony. This breaking and entering, robbery, murder, drug dealing. Like families will turn back fast and completely exonerate you and not write you for years. And then now what do you do when you get out? You have no family support, no agency support, no support from the government, no reentry plan. You got $40 in your pocket. You can get McDonald's for the day. Now, what are you going to do tomorrow? So that's why we need to change everything. This system is broke. It's completely broken.
I was thinking about that individual that's just Sharif was talking about. And at that moment, I was so taken aback that he actually asked his phone what they were serving in a federal prison in Atlanta. I will never forget, Sharif. That I stopped and I told him immediately, asked, like, why are you asking that? And then we conversation unfolded, and and I told him, I said, man, I said, you can't tell me nothing about prison, because he's talking to Sharif and I like, man, y'all don't know what's going on, and you can't even identify, you don't know what I'm going through. And I looked at him, I said, man, you can't tell me nothing about prison. I said, I just came home from doing 20 years in the feds. And he looked at me like, what? You just did he Sharif? He looked at me very surprised and was like, you just did 20 years? He's like, why you don't act like you just did 20 years? And I said, because I never allowed prison to become me. I was in that environment, but I never became prison. I never allowed prison to become who I was. I fought it with every bit of energy in my body not to become a product of prison. And that individual that asked about the menu, that is a person who allowed themselves to become a product of prison.
So that is excellent, as Shereen in the chat box says. You have drive, you have stamina, you have analytical skills. What helps the guy who doesn't?
Support.
Honestly,
support. It's about. You have to understand that's why the IRP is individualized. It's about meeting an individual where they are. Everybody is not going to be Adrian. They're not. That's just the brass tacks of it. They're not going to be Adrian. They're not going to have used their time constructively when they were behind bars, or have that drive and that dedication of, that self motivation to not reoffend and go back. Most people aren't going to have that. And that's why you have to start getting at individuals before they get released. That's why it is so important that pre-release services are there for an individual. No matter how long it takes for their release, you have to start getting individuals before they get released. That's the only way you're going to try to have them separate themselves from that institution, or, like Adrian said, not become prison. You have to start instilling that hope in them, because they're beat down and discouraged from the minute they walk in. So you figure 10, 15 years of a CO beating you down emotionally and degrading you and feeling like you're less than a man, and now you got to worry about getting shanked in the yard. And I mean, it's so many things that go on in that. So to have that small sliver of hope, that small sliver of hope will change everything. So even if people have 1,000 infractions, whatever it might be, but they have to have the support, and the support has to be consistent. It cannot be, I'm going to be here for you 1 minute or a 5-minute conversation once a month. It cannot be that. That's why when I went and see, and it wasn't just Adrian that I was seeing in Butner, it was everybody I was seeing once a week, like clockwork. They knew I was coming and they looked forward to my visits because they knew I was bringing in information for them that would assist them with their reentry plan. A lot of individuals in there wanted to start their own businesses. So I would bring in information about LLCs and everything else like that. So it's about meeting the individual where they are, wherever they're at. And everybody's going to be different. Everybody's needs are going to be different. Everybody's functional level is going to be different. Everybody's cognitive level is going to be different. Everybody's emotional level is going to be different. So you have to meet an individual where they are and work from that point up, and everything
Absolutely.
will be fine.
I want to get some quick announcements in. We've got just a few minutes left on the show. Please join us next week. We're going to be talking about managing darkness in a season of light. Lots of people are uplifted by the holiday season. Some of us not so much. It's very commercial. Maybe it's reinforces a feeling of loneliness and exclusion. Whether you are that person or you have that person in your life as a friend or partner, join us for a conversation on how to muddle through the holidays if it's not your thing. Also, when you leave our Zoom session tonight, you will magically see a Survey Monkey appear on your screen. Please fill that out. It takes 2 minutes and it will really help us keep our grant funding, help us improve over time. There is a question that's been sitting in the Q&A box. Is it possible to help people learn to think beyond the present moments?
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely possible. Like I said, that's why everything is going to be individualized. So at that present moment, when I meet a consumer, which is what we call our clients, for the first time, I tell them, I'm only going to ask them what you did for your felony one time. And we're never going to discuss it after that. Only so I know how to start to formulate the IRP, because based upon whatever their charge is, unfortunately, they're going to be eliminated from a lot of resources and a lot of services that are open to the general public. So having that individual start to think about their reentry, which is empowering them, will get them off that mindset of, okay, I'm stuck in prison right now. Now you're looking forward to your release date. You're looking forward to the weekly visits that you're going to have with your reentry specialist. You're looking forward to the interaction. You're looking forward to the information being brought in. You're looking forward to the supports that are going to be on the outside available to you, because now you have information, and information is probably the most powerful thing you can have.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Adrian. We've just got 2 minutes. So answer the question and any closing thoughts.
Yes, so I was 2 things that Sharif said that I wanted to mention as well. With individuals who serve extended sentences, and Sharif spoke about support, I think a lot of people don't take into consideration that throughout time, especially being adult males, that what happens to some individuals, unfortunately as well, through these extensive sentences, their family dies off. So when their family dies off, they have no one to return home to. And unfortunately, one of the most welcoming environments for a guy who is released from prison is his old neighborhood where he originally caught his charges. And in that world, so to give you a little understanding of that world and that environment, when an individual has done extensive time in prison, has not cooperated with the police or the federal government or anything of that nature, the hood, quote unquote, pays them homage by giving them a healthy supply of drugs and a firearm. Now, because as your friend and I've been making money on my own, I give you more drugs, you get back on your feet. And now what that does to an individual who's already battling demons or their addiction to hustling and things of that nature is you entice these demons. Because now that you're back in the game and you're now hustling, I have a valuable ally. I know this guy's not going to tell if he gets arrested. I also know he handles his business and he's a good hustler. So this person is an asset to me as opposed to a liability. And that's what happens a lot of times when individuals, family passes away or they do not have correct supports and they return to the neighborhoods where they are originally from.
Sure. That's where I can see the draw. That's where I get respect. That's where I feel belonging.
Yes, exactly.
Sharif, any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to allow us to push this envelope forward. I want to thank everyone who was paying attention and viewing. and recognizing that, you know, the system is broke on a lot of levels, and we're going to need to pretty much shake that whole foundation from the foundation up and change everything if we as people care about other people. Because if you care about other people in general, felon or not, disability or not, mental illness or not, still a person. So if you care about people, you're going to want to try to get change going. So I would say, you know, speak to your congressman, speak to your state representative, see what reentry programs are going on in your county, see if there's a SIL in your county that you can get behind and support. And, you know, if we have the support and the financial needs that we can continue this program, then we're going to change things systemically. It might take a little while, but
yes,
with people like Adrian and myself, we're dedicated. So
absolutely. Just to chime in on what Sharif said, I would definitely ask anyone who's listening to the call, whether Facebook or Zoom, please support your local Center for Independent Living. Sharif is in Raleigh at Alliance of Disability Advocates. I am the Director of Operations in Winston-Salem at Solutions for Independence. We both have county coverage areas who we are able to serve individuals in the counties that we serve. And because of the entire independent living philosophy, we do have the flexibility to serve individuals who are incarcerated. Please, if you know anyone that utilize our services, please let us know, send them our way.
I think that's a great note to end on. Again, thank you so much for sharing your time and your story. And thank you for providing a new image, a new vision of courage, of bravery, of having an authentic conversation. I've learned a lot tonight, and I really appreciate both of you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. Have a great week, everyone. I hope to see you next
Bye.
Thursday. Bye.